They say revenge is best served cold, but Captain Marcus Ghost Reeves never believed in waiting when justice needed to be served. By the time silence returned to Thunder Valley that moonlit night, 7 unconscious bandits lay scattered across the dusty parking lot of Pete's Roadhouse Bar and Grill, their prized motorcycles reduced to smoking wreckage, and the man they called Snake Eyes learned a brutal lesson about the difference between destroying a stranger's bike and awakening the fury of a decorated special operations warrior. But that's getting ahead of our story. To understand how a peaceful desert roadhouse became a battleground and how one retired Delta Force operator systematically dismantled the most feared motorcycle gang in the Southwest, we need to go back to where it all began. Before we dive into today's story, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. And if you enjoy real-life tales of justice served, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We've got another incredible story waiting for you tomorrow. The Arizona sun hung low on the horizon, painting the desert sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple as Marcus Reeves guided his custom-built Triumph Bonneville down the winding road toward Thunder Valley. The vintage motorcycle, restored by his own hands during months of therapy after his last deployment, purred beneath him like a contented lion. Each mile brought back memories of the small town he'd left behind 15 years ago, when duty and destiny had called him to serve his country in the world's darkest corners. The familiar silhouette of the Superstition Mountains loomed ahead, their jagged peaks casting long shadows across the desert floor. Every curve of Route 87 felt like a step back in time to the days when he'd first learned to ride on these same roads, taught by his father before cancer took him too soon. The bike's engine echoed off the canyon walls, its rhythm matching the steady beat of Marcus's heart. Something felt different about the valley, though, and tension in the air that his combat-honed instincts couldn't ignore. The first red flag came when he passed Old Mike's gas station. The familiar establishment, a landmark for 3 decades, stood dark and abandoned, its windows boarded up, crude graffiti sprayed across its weathered walls. A symbol he recognized from his intelligence briefings overseas, a cobra wrapped around a dagger, marked the territory of its new owners. Thunder Valley itself appeared deserted as Marcus cruised down Main Street, despite the early hour. The usual crowd of tourists and locals that gathered to watch the sunset was conspicuously absent. Shops that should have been bustling with activity had their shutters drawn, some sporting fresh padlocks and chains. Even the town's famous ice cream parlor, where he'd spent countless summer afternoons in his youth, bore a for sale sign in its window. Marcus pulled into the gravel parking lot of the Desert Rose Motel, the same place he'd promised his old friend Pete he'd stay at when he finally returned home. The neon rose that had blazed bright against the desert night for 40 years flickered weakly now. Half its bulbs burned out or broken. Sarah, Pete's daughter and Marcus's high school sweetheart, stood behind the reception desk, but her usual warm smile was replaced by dark circles under her eyes and a nervousness he'd never seen in her before. "Marcus," she whispered, as if afraid to speak too loudly, "is it really you?" He removed his riding gloves, revealing the calloused hands of a man who'd seen more combat than he cared to remember. "Hello, Sarah. It's been a long time." She rushed around the desk and hugged him tightly, her body trembling slightly. "Thank God you're here. Pete's been trying to reach you for weeks, but we couldn't get through to your unit." Marcus's jaw tightened. He'd been deep undercover on his final mission, hunting a terrorist cell in the Hindu Kush Mountains. "What's happened to the town, Sarah? What's wrong?" Before she could answer, the rumble of multiple motorcycles shattered the evening quiet. Not the steady purr of law-abiding riders, but the intentionally loud, aggressive roar of machines modified to intimidate. Marcus moved to the window, watching as 5 riders pulled into the parking lot, their bikes bearing the same cobra and dagger emblem he'd seen at Old Mike's. The lead rider, a mountain of a man with a shaved head and a cobra tattooed up his neck, dismounted and headed for the motel office. Marcus noted his walk, the way he carried himself. Ex-military, probably dishonorably discharged, judging by the chip on his shoulder evident in every step. "Sarah," Marcus said quietly, not taking his eyes off the approaching threat, "get behind the desk and whatever happens next, remember, I'm not the same man who left Thunder Valley. I've learned things, seen things, done things that changed me, some for better, some for worse, but all of it is about to become very relevant." The office door chimed as the biker entered, bringing with him the smell of leather, cigarettes, and menace. His eyes locked onto Sarah first, then shifted to Marcus, studying his riding gear, his military bearing, the way he stood between the biker and the desk in a casual stance that any trained fighter would recognize as anything but casual. Well, the biker sneered. "Looks like we got ourselves a new guest. Name's Viper, and there's something you need to understand about Thunder Valley, soldier boy. Everything here belongs to the Desert Vipers now, including this motel, including that sweet ride of yours outside." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. In the gathering darkness outside, the desert wind began to rise, carrying with it the promise of a storm. Thunder Valley was about to learn what happened when predators discovered they'd chosen the wrong prey, and Marcus "Ghost" Reeves was about to remind himself why some called him the deadliest man to ever serve in Delta Force. Marcus stood motionless in the motel office, his combat-trained senses cataloging every detail of the man who called himself Viper. The biker's stance suggested formal military training, but the sloppy execution revealed someone who'd abandoned discipline for brute intimidation. Behind the desk, Sarah's breathing had quickened, though she maintained the outward calm of someone who'd grown accustomed to fear. "Funny thing about ownership," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the quiet confidence that had steadied his men through countless operations. "Where I come from, it usually involves paperwork, not threats." Viper's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching beneath the cobra tattoo. "Way I see it, you got two choices, soldier boy. Hand over the keys to that pretty Triumph out there, or we take it anyway and leave you breathing through a new hole." The desert wind rattled the office windows, carrying with it the rumble of more motorcycles approaching. Through the glass, Marcus counted another 6 riders pulling into the parking lot, their bikes adorned with the same Cobra emblem. The odds were shifting, but numbers had never been the deciding factor in any of his operations. "Marcus," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling, "please, just give them what they want. These men, they hurt Pete bad last month when he refused to pay their protection fees. Broke both his legs. He's still in Phoenix Medical Center." The revelation settled like ice in Marcus's veins. Pete Walker had been more than just the owner of the local roadhouse. He'd been a second father to Marcus after his own passed away. The thought of this gang attacking a 65-year-old man ignited a cold fury he hadn't felt since his last combat operation. "Tell you what, Viper," Marcus said, maintaining his relaxed posture even as his mind calculated angles, distances, and potential weapons within reach. "Since you seem interested in my bike, let's take a closer look at it." He moved toward the door, noting how Viper shifted his weight in response. Ex-military for sure, but the man telegraphed his intentions. Like an amateur, outside, the other gang members had formed a loose semicircle around Marcus's Triumph, their leather vests bearing nicknames like Fang, Rattler, and Sidewinder. The bike stood in stark contrast to their gaudy choppers, classic lines restored to perfection, every part chosen and installed by Marcus during the long months of physical therapy after his last mission. Each piece held a memory, the handlebars he'd bent into shape while relearning to grip with his injured right hand, the fuel tank he'd painted while practicing fine motor control, the custom seat he'd stitched during sleepless nights when the memories of combat kept him awake. "Sweet ride," one of the bikers commented, running a gloved hand along the polished chrome. "Bet it'll fetch a nice price in Phoenix." Marcus's eye caught something that made his blood run colder. Fresh blood on the biker's knuckles, and a familiar class ring. Judge Morrison's son Tommy had worn one just like it. The teenager worked at the gas station to save up for his own motorcycle. "That's an interesting ring," Marcus said, his voice deceptively casual. "Don't see many Thunder Valley High School class rings around here anymore." The biker, Fang, according to his vest, quickly shoved his hand into his pocket. "Mind your own business, stranger," but Marcus was already piecing it together. The abandoned gas station, Tommy's ring, the fresh blood. These predators hadn't just taken over the town. They were systematically destroying anyone who represented its future. Young people like Tommy, who might have grown up to resist their control, were being targeted first. The desert night had grown unnaturally still, as if nature itself was holding its breath. In the distance, heat lightning flickered across the Superstition Mountains, illuminating the scene in brief, stark flashes. Marcus counted 11 gang members now, all armed with various weapons poorly concealed under their vests. Their body language screamed amateur hour, too much swagger, not enough awareness. "Last chance, soldier boy," Viper growled, pulling out a heavy chain and wrapping it around his fist. "Walk away now, leave the bike, and maybe you get to leave Thunder Valley with just a warning." Marcus's gaze swept the parking lot one final time, noting positions, distances, and the telling fact that none of these men had proper combat spacing. They'd clustered too close together, making themselves vulnerable to someone who knew how to exploit that mistake. His final mission as a Delta operator had involved eliminating a terrorist cell that had made similar errors in judgment. "You know what the hardest part of special operations training was?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet lot. "It wasn't the physical challenges or the tactical exercises. It was learning to give people a chance to walk away, even when you knew they wouldn't take it." Confused looks passed between the gang members. This wasn't how their victims usually responded. Behind them, Sarah had moved away from the motel office, her phone discreetly raised. Marcus caught her eye and gave an imperceptible nod. Whatever happened next needed to be documented. "I'm going to make this simple," Marcus continued, rolling his shoulders slightly to loosen muscles that remembered far too well what came next. "Leave Thunder Valley, never come back, or find out why some of the world's most dangerous terrorists called me Ghost, not because I was hard to find, but because I was the last thing they never saw coming." The desert wind picked up again, carrying the promise of violence as ancient as the mountains themselves. In the distance, a coyote howled, a lonely sound that seemed to signal the end of conversation and the beginning of something else entirely. Thunder Valley was about to witness the difference between common thugs and a man who'd spent his life perfecting the art of dealing with threats to those he protected. Viper's response came in the form of a whistling chain aimed at Marcus's head. A telegraphed move that any trained operative would have seen coming from a mile away. Marcus stepped inside the arc of the swing, his movements fluid and economical, catching the chain and using Viper's own momentum to send him stumbling into two of his companions. "Get him!" Viper roared, his face reddening with rage and embarrassment. What happened next would later become the stuff of Thunder Valley legend. Marcus moved like smoke through the group of bandits, each strike precise and measured. He wasn't fighting to show off or inflict unnecessary harm. This was textbook special operations close-quarters combat, designed to neutralize threats. With maximum efficiency, 3 gang members went down in the first 5 seconds, victims of their own poor positioning and Marcus's expertly placed strikes. The 4th pulled a knife, slashing wildly in a way that told Marcus he'd learned his fighting style in prison rather than any formal training. "Enough!" A new voice cut through the chaos. A tall, lean man emerged from one of the recently arrived bikes, his leather vest bearing a different symbol, a crown-wearing cobra that marked him as leadership. Stand down, all of you, the fighting. Paused, though Marcus maintained his ready stance. He studied the newcomer with practiced eyes, the way he carried himself, the calculation in his gaze, the subtle scars that spoke of real combat experience. This wasn't another common thug. Well, if it isn't Marcus Ghost Reeves himself, the man said, a cold smile playing across his face. Captain of Delta Force Team 6, decorated more times than most soldiers have hot meals. I've heard stories about you. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Seems you have me at a disadvantage. Colonel James Snake Eyes Morrison, formerly of the 75th Ranger Regiment. Though they probably deleted my service record after that unfortunate incident in Kandahar. The pieces clicked into place. Morrison had been court-martialed for running a protection racket in Afghanistan, extorting local merchants under the guise of security operations. He disappeared before his sentence could be carried out. Word travels fast, Marcus replied, keeping his voice neutral while cataloguing the new threats that had emerged. More bikes had arrived, bringing the total to nearly 20 gang members. Sarah's voice cut through the tension. Marcus, they're the ones who hurt Tommy. Snake Eyes ordered it himself, said it was a message to the judge about proper respect. Morrison's smile turned predatory. Ah, Sarah Walker, still trying to save this. Dead-end town? Your father learned his lesson about defiance. Shame Tommy had to learn it too. Marcus felt the familiar cold clarity descend over his mind, the state of heightened awareness that had kept him alive through countless operations. You made 3 serious mistakes, Morrison. First, you forgot what men like us are trained to do. Second, you targeted civilians under my protection. But your biggest mistake, that's my bike you're leaning against. Morrison's hand shot out, grabbing the Triumph's handlebar. You mean this bike? With a sudden shove, he sent the motorcycle crashing onto its side. The sound of breaking glass and scraping metal cut through Marcus like physical pain. The machine he'd rebuilt piece by piece, the therapy project that had helped him recover from his wounds, lay damaged in the dust. Classic intimidation tactic, Morrison sneered. Destroy what they love, break their spirit. Did I miss anything from the playbook, Captain? Just one thing, Marcus replied, his voice deadly quiet. In Delta, we learn to read people. Right. Now I count 6 of your men who are already questioning their life choices. 3 more who are wondering if their leader's grudge is worth dying for. And you, Colonel, you're wondering if you finally picked a fight you can't win. Morrison's facade cracked slightly. You think you can take on my entire gang alone? Even Ghost has to sleep sometime. Who said I was alone? Marcus's gaze shifted to the darkness beyond the parking lot. Red and blue lights suddenly flickered to life, revealing 3 unmarked police vehicles. Sarah's been live-streaming everything to Judge Morrison. State police are rather interested in the man who ordered an attack on the judge's son. You're bluffing, Morrison snarled, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. You forgot the most important lesson from our training, Colonel. The best operators never work alone. While you were building a gang, I was building a network. Right. Now, every law enforcement agency in 3 states is getting a very interesting file about your operation. Seems some of your men aren't as loyal as you thought. Movement in the shadows caught Marcus's eye. Familiar figures taking up tactical positions. He'd made some calls before riding into town, and his old Delta Force teammates never could resist a reunion. Last chance, Morrison, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the now silent parking lot. Surrender now or find out why terrorists gave me that nickname. Thunder rumbled across the valley, and the first drops of rain began to fall. The desert was about to witness a different kind of storm, one that would remind everyone why you never ever destroy a Delta operator's motorcycle. Morrison's laughter shattered the tense silence, but Marcus detected the undertone of nervousness. In it, the same sound he'd heard from cornered insurgents trying to bluff their way out of hopeless situations. You always were a Boy Scout, Reeves? Still trying to save the world one small town at a time? Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the parking lot in stark relief. Marcus caught glimpses of his old teammates moving into position, shadows among shadows. Mike Whisper Rodriguez on the roof of the motel, Sam Angel Martinez covering the back exit, and Jack Frost Sullivan somewhere in the darkness to his left. The gang members, untrained in counter-surveillance, remained oblivious to the noose tightening around them. "Actually," Marcus replied, purposefully drawing Morrison's attention, "I retired from saving the world. These days, I just fix motorcycles. Or at least, I did until you decided to make things personal." He gestured to his fallen Triumph, coolant, leaking from its damaged engine like blood from a wound. Sarah had retreated to the motel office, but kept her phone steady, documenting everything. Through the window's reflection, Marcus spotted two more Desert Vipers trying to circle behind him. Amateurs. They'd forgotten about the glass. "You know what your problem is, Ghost?" Morrison took a step forward, his hand resting casually on the gun hidden beneath his vest. "You never learned when to let go. Some places aren't worth saving. Thunder Valley's dead, has been since the interstate bypassed it. We're just picking the bones." "Funny thing about dead towns," Marcus countered, subtly shifting his weight to prepare for what was coming. "Sometimes they just need someone to fight for them. Like Tommy Morrison, 17 years old, working 2 jobs to buy his first bike, had his whole life ahead of him until your thugs decided to send his father a message." A muscle twitched in Morrison's jaw. "Kids need to learn how the world really works." "Oh, they're learning." Marcus allowed a cold smile to cross his face. "They're learning that sometimes the monsters are real, but they're also learning that monsters can bleed." Through his earpiece, Marcus heard Whisper's voice, barely a whisper. 6 tangos moving up the west side, armed. Angel has eyes on their vehicles, gas tanks rigged to blow. These boys were planning something big. Marcus processed the information while maintaining eye contact with Morrison. The Desert Vipers hadn't just come to intimidate, they'd come prepared for war. The rigged motorcycles suggested they'd planned to send a message to the entire town, probably targeting Pete's Roadhouse during the busy weekend rush. "You've got a choice, Colonel," Marcus said, loud enough for all to hear. "Surrender now, face charges for Tommy's assault, and maybe some of your men stay out of federal prison. Or what?" Morrison sneered. "Your invisible friends in the shadows take us all down? Please, I've got 30 men who—" 27, Marcus corrected. 3 left when they recognize me. Former Rangers, if I'm not mistaken. Seems some of your recruits still remember their oath to protect the innocent, not prey on them." Uncertainty flickered across Morrison's face. He hadn't noticed the deserters. More importantly, he hadn't noticed that his remaining men had unconsciously shifted their positions, creating gaps in their perimeter that Marcus's team could exploit. "Even if you're not bluffing about your backup," Morrison said, "you're forgetting something crucial." He pulled out a phone, showing Marcus a live feed of Pete's Roadhouse. 2 more Desert Vipers stood inside, their weapons trained on the evening. Crowd. "One call from me, and your friend Pete loses more than just his legs." Marcus had expected this. Hostages were always the last resort of desperate men. What Morrison didn't know was that Pete Walker had been discharged from Phoenix Medical Center 3 days ago. The crowd in his bar consisted entirely of undercover state police officers waiting for exactly this moment. "Interesting feed," Marcus commented. "You might want to check the timestamp." Morrison's eyes flickered to the phone's display. The footage was from last week, a fact he'd only now noticed. His face contorted with rage as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered. "Kill him!" Morrison roared, drawing his weapon. But Marcus was already moving. The first shot went wide as Marcus closed the distance, years of CQC training taking over. He struck Morrison's wrist with surgical precision, sending the gun spinning into the darkness. The other Desert Vipers rushed forward, but they were met with a coordinated response that spoke of countless missions and perfect teamwork. Whisper's suppressed rifle cracked twice from the rooftop, taking out the gang's rear guard. Angel and Frost emerged from their positions, their movements a deadly dance they'd perfected in 100 battles. The gang members, expecting to overwhelm a single opponent, suddenly found themselves caught in a perfectly executed ambush. Through his earpiece, Marcus heard the state police commander giving the order at Pete's Roadhouse. "All units, move in. Targets are armed and dangerous." Morrison, his face a mask of desperation, reached for a backup weapon, but Marcus was faster. The techniques that had kept him alive through 3 tours in special operations weren't flashy or dramatic. They were efficient, brutal, and final. Morrison's arm broke with a clean snap, and he went down hard on the asphalt. "That," Marcus said quietly, "was for Tommy." The rain began to fall in earnest now, washing away the dust and grime of battle. In the distance, sirens wailed as state police units converged on Thunder Valley. The night was far from over, but the first phase of the operation had gone exactly as planned. Now it was time to show the Desert Vipers, and anyone else who might follow them, why some towns were worth fighting for, and why some memories were worth dying for. Thunder Valley's night erupted into controlled chaos as state police tactical units flooded the parking lot, their lights painting the desert landscape in alternating red and blue. The Desert Vipers, caught between Marcus's team and advancing law enforcement, began throwing down their weapons, their earlier bravado evaporating in the face of overwhelming force. "Clear!" Whisper called from his perch, maintaining overwatch as police officers moved in to secure the suspects. No movement on the perimeter. Morrison lay on the wet asphalt, cradling his broken arm, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "This isn't over, Ghost," he spat. "You have no idea what you've started." Marcus knelt beside his fallen Triumph, assessing the damage. The front forks were bent, the gas tank dented, and the custom exhaust he'd spent weeks fabricating was crushed. Each broken piece represented hours of therapy, countless nights spent rebuilding not just a motorcycle, but himself. "Actually," he replied without looking at Morrison, "I know exactly what I've started. The end of your reign in Thunder Valley. The beginning of something else." He stood, turning to face his former colleague. "You forgot the first rule of special operations, Colonel. Never underestimate local intelligence." Sarah emerged from the motel office, her phone still recording. Behind her came a stream of Thunder Valley residents, shopkeepers, mechanics, teachers, all carrying phones or cameras. They'd captured everything, creating an undeniable record of the Desert Viper's true nature. "We've been documenting everything," Sarah explained, her voice stronger now. "Every threat, every act of violence, every protection payment Pete made. Sure, everyone kept records, even after what they did to him." State Police Captain Rodriguez approached, his badge gleaming in the emergency lights. "Marcus Reeves, John Martinez, FBI Task Force. Your intel was solid. We've got teams hitting Desert Viper locations across 3 states right now. Gun running, drug trafficking, money laundering. They weren't just terrorizing small towns. They were using them as distribution hubs." A younger officer hurried up, his face grim. "Sir, you need to see what we found in their bikes. The explosives weren't just for show. They had enough firepower rigged up to level half the town." Marcus exchanged glances with his teammates. The Desert Vipers hadn't just been planning to intimidate Thunder Valley. They'd been preparing to make an example of it, one that would have sent a message to every other small town in their territory. "Get EOD out here," Captain Rodriguez ordered, "and someone find out who their bomb maker is. This level of sophistication suggests military training." "That would be Sergeant Carlos Sidewinder Ramirez," Marcus supplied. "Former EOD specialist, discharged, for selling equipment on the black market." "He was Morrison's technical expert." Morrison's head snapped up. "How the hell did you, like I said, local intelligence?" Marcus gestured to the gathering crowd. "You thought you were terrorizing victims. Instead, you were surrounded by witnesses. Every time you bragged about your operations in Pete's bar, someone was listening. Every time you threatened a business owner, they remembered details. The sound of helicopters filled the air as media crews began arriving, drawn by the unprecedented law enforcement operation. Camera lights illuminated the scene, capturing the moment Thunder Valley's nightmare began to end. "Your mistake," Marcus continued, addressing not just Morrison, but all the captured Desert Vipers, was thinking small towns were easy targets. That fear would keep people isolated, divided. You never understood what places like Thunder Valley are really about. Sarah stepped forward, her voice carrying across the parking lot. "We take care of our own here. Pete taught us that. Even after what you did to him, he kept fighting back the only way he could, by making sure everyone documented everything, building a case." Marcus's team had begun helping the police process the scene. Angel was coordinating with the EOD units, his expertise with explosives proving invaluable. Frost worked with forensics, ensuring every piece of evidence was properly catalogued. Whisper maintained his overwatch, old habits dying hard. "You know what the hardest part of Delta Force training was, Morrison?" Marcus asked, watching as his former colleague was helped to his feet by state troopers, learning that the strongest weapon isn't your rifle or your training. It's the people you protect, the communities you serve. A familiar voice called out from the crowd, "Marcus!" Tommy Morrison pushed forward, his face still bearing the bruises from his lesson, but his eyes bright with vindication. "Dad said. He said you'd come back, said you never forgot where you came from." The young man approached Marcus's damaged motorcycle, running his hand along its bent frame. "I can help you fix it," he offered. "I've been learning mechanics at old Joe's garage before they shut him down." "We'll fix more than just the bike," Marcus promised, placing a hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Joe's garage, Pete's bar, everything they tried to destroy. Thunder Valley's not dead, Colonel. It was just waiting for someone to remind it how to fight back. The desert wind had died down, leaving behind the clean scent of rain-washed earth. In the distance, the first rays of dawn began to paint the Superstition Mountains in shades of gold and purple. Thunder Valley was about to witness its first sunrise, free from fear in months, but Marcus knew the real work was just beginning. Recovery wouldn't happen overnight. But as he watched more townspeople emerging from their homes, gathering together without fear for the first time in months, he saw something Morrison had missed, the unbreakable spirit of a community that refused to be broken. The Desert Vipers had tried to rule through fear, but they'd never understood that some things couldn't be destroyed by intimidation or violence. Some things like hope and courage only grew stronger under pressure. The aftermath of the Desert Viper's downfall sent shockwaves through Thunder Valley and beyond. By mid-morning, FBI teams had uncovered weapons caches in abandoned mines outside town, drug shipments hidden in seemingly innocent delivery trucks, and financial records that implicated officials across 3 counties. But Marcus knew the cartel wouldn't take the loss of their operation lying down. "Phoenix Branch is moving," Whisper reported, monitoring encrypted communications from his position on the motel roof. "Large convoy headed this way. Looks like the cartels sending their heavy hitters." Marcus studied the tactical displays set up in what had become their temporary command center, Sarah's motel office. His team had transformed the space into a nerve center with maps, surveillance feeds, and communications equipment covering every surface. Thunder Valley might have won its first battle, but the war was far from over. "They're adapting faster than expected," Frost observed, marking potential approach routes on the map. "Cartels learned from Morrison's mistakes. They'll come in professional this time, coordinated." Sarah brought fresh coffee to the operators, her hands steady now despite the tension. "How bad is it going to get, Marcus?" "Worse before it gets better," he answered honestly. The Desert Vipers weren't just a gang, they were the cartel's distribution network for the entire Southwest. "We didn't just hurt their pride, we hurt their profits." Captain Rodriguez entered with fresh intelligence. Border Patrol intercepted 3 vehicles loaded with military-grade weapons. They were headed this way. My sources say the cartel sent for their specialist, a former Mexican Special Forces operator known as El Cirujano, the surgeon. Marcus's jaw tightened. He knew the name. Santiago Reyes. We crossed paths in Colombia 6 years ago. He's not just a cartel enforcer, he's a tactical genius, specializes in taking over small towns, turning them into fortified operations centers. Through the window, they watched as Thunder Valley came back to life. Shopkeepers reopened their doors. Children played in the streets again, and neighbors gathered to talk without fear. They had no idea what was coming. "We need to evacuate the town," Angel suggested, but Marcus shook his head. "That's exactly what they want. Empty buildings, clear. Lines of fire. El Cirujano's playbook is classic military doctrine. Isolate, dominate, fortify. We give him an empty town. We give him exactly what he needs." A call came in from Pete, still recovering in Phoenix. "Marcus, my old army contacts say there's serious movement in the cartel. They've never committed this many resources to one operation. Thunder Valley isn't just about revenge anymore. They're making it personal." "Good," Marcus replied, surprising everyone. "Personal means emotional. Emotional means mistakes." He turned to his team, the same men who'd followed him through the world's darkest corners. "The cartel thinks they're sending an army to take a town. They don't understand they're walking into a prepared defense run by operators who specialized in exactly this kind of warfare." The first signs of the cartel's response came subtly. Internet service to Thunder Valley mysteriously cut out. Cell phones lost signal. Power fluctuations began affecting different sections of town. Classic isolation tactics. "They're softening us up," Frost noted, tracking the systematic disruptions, "cutting us off from the outside world." Marcus had expected this. "Sarah, implement Protocol Echo. Tell everyone to switch to the backup communications we set up last night." Throughout Thunder Valley, residents began pulling out old CB radios, ham radio sets, and other equipment Marcus's team had distributed. The cartel's attempt to isolate the town ran headlong into preparations made by men who'd spent careers planning for exactly these scenarios. "Multiple vehicles approaching from the south," Whisper reported. "Professional spacing, defensive formations. These aren't gangbangers, they're trained military." Marcus watched through high-powered optics as the first wave of cartel forces established positions outside town. Their movements were precise, their equipment top-tier. El Cirujano was announcing his presence with a show of force designed to break morale before the real attack began. "They're good," Angel admitted, watching the cartel operators move. "Really good." "But they've made one critical mistake," Marcus replied, a grim smile playing across his face. "They think they're here to take Thunder Valley. They don't realize Thunder Valley's already taken them." He keyed his radio, activating the network of observers his team had positioned throughout the area. Every approach was watched, every cartel, movement tracked and recorded. The desert itself had become one giant sensor grid, monitored by men who'd learned their craft in the world's harshest combat zones. "Sir," a young state trooper rushed in, "we've got reports of cartel checkpoints being established on all access roads. They're cutting off the town completely." Marcus nodded. "Right on schedule. Now we find out if El Cirujano remembers the most important lesson from special operations. Never fight the battle your enemy has prepared for." Through the window, dark clouds gathered over the superstition. Mountains. Another storm was brewing, both literally and figuratively. Thunder Valley was about to become a battlefield again, but this time the defenders weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for redemption, for community, for the right to live without fear. "They think they're hunting us," Marcus told his team, watching as more cartel vehicles appeared on the horizon. "Time to show them why some hunters should be more worried about becoming prey." El Cirujano's opening gambit came at sunset, not with violence, but with a message. A single black SUV rolled down Main Street, its tinted windows reflecting the dying light. It stopped in front of Pete's Roadhouse, and a man in an immaculate suit emerged, carrying a white envelope. "Classic psychological warfare," Marcus observed. From his position in the diner across the street, he wants us to see him coming, wants us to know he can reach out and touch us anytime he wants. The messenger entered Pete's Roadhouse, where Sarah was overseeing the evening crowd, a mix of genuine patrons and undercover state police officers. Through concealed cameras, Marcus watched the scene unfold. A message from El Cirujano, the suit-clad man announced, his accent precisely cultivated to hide its origins. He placed the envelope on the bar, for the one they call Ghost. Inside the envelope, Marcus found a single photograph, his Triumph motorcycle in its glory days, taken months ago when he'd first arrived in Thunder Valley. On the back, written, in elegant script, "What we break can never be truly fixed. You have 1 hour to surrender the town, or we break everything." "Trying to get in your head," Whisper commented through the radio. "He remembers Colombia." Marcus smiled grimly. The cartel enforcer was referring to their previous encounter, where Marcus's unit had systematically dismantled El Cirujano's operation piece by piece. He remembers wrong. Colombia wasn't about breaking things. It was about knowing which pieces to move. Throughout Thunder Valley, residents watched as more cartel vehicles took up positions. Their presence was deliberately visible, a show of force designed to emphasize the town's vulnerability. But what they didn't see were the preparations Marcus and his team had spent the night implementing. "All units report," Marcus commanded, softly into his radio. "Angel in position. Southeast quadrant secure. Locals armed and ready. Frost here. Western approaches covered. Surveillance network active. Whisper on overwatch. Got eyes on their command element. Counting 12 vehicles, at least 30 operators." Marcus studied the tactical display they'd set up in the Roadhouse's back office. The cartel forces were professional, their deployment textbook perfect. But they were playing straight into his hands. "They think they're setting up a siege," he explained to Sarah and Tommy, who'd insisted on staying to help. "Classic encirclement, cut off supplies, communications, wear down resistance. What they don't realize is we're not the ones who are trapped." Tommy pointed to several locations on the map. "The old mine tunnels. They run all through the valley. Dad used to say they were bootlegger routes during Prohibition." "Smart kid," Marcus nodded. "El Cirujano's men are watching the roads, but they don't know the ground, not like we do." Sarah's phone buzzed, one of the few still working thanks to the encrypted network Marcus's team had established. "Message from Pete. FBI's ready with the financial intel. They're just waiting for your signal." The hour deadline approached. As storm clouds gathered over Thunder Valley, lightning flickered in the distance, nature providing its own dramatic backdrop to the confrontation about to unfold. "Movement," Whisper reported. "El Cirujano himself is approaching. Black Range. Rover diplomatic plates, 4-vehicle escort." Marcus watched through the Roadhouse windows. As the convoy rolled to a stop, Santiago El Cirujano Reyes stepped out, his bearing military precise despite the expensive suit he wore. The cartel enforcer's face bore a new scar since Colombia. "A souvenir from their last encounter. Time to remind him why they call you Ghost," Angel said over the radio. Marcus keyed his mic. "Execute Operation Phantom. All units go dark." Throughout Thunder Valley, lights began going out in precise sequence, not from power failures, but from carefully coordinated action. The darkness spread from the edges of town inward, leaving only Pete's Roadhouse illuminated, a deliberate challenge to El Cirujano's authority. "Dramatic as always, Ghost," El Cirujano called out, his voice carrying across the empty street. "But theatrics won't save your little town." Marcus stepped out onto the Roadhouse's porch, allowing himself to be seen. "Santiago, You're looking well for a man who lost his entire operation in Colombia." The cartel enforcer's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Colombia was business. This is pleasure. You hurt our organization, embarrassed us in front of our competitors. The Desert Vipers might have been amateur hour, but what comes next will be professional." "Professional?" Marcus gestured to the surrounding buildings. "Professional operators would have noticed they're being watched. Every window, every rooftop, every shadow. This isn't your kill zone, Santiago. It's ours. On cue, laser sights, activated across Thunder Valley. Red dots appeared on every cartel vehicle, every operator's chest. El Cirujano's security detail tensed, but their training told them what their eyes confirmed. They were completely surrounded. "You didn't just walk into a town," Marcus continued. "You walked into an ambush planned by men who learned their craft in the same places you did. Only we never forgot the most important lesson. Never underestimate home field advantage." Thunder rolled across the valley as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. El Cirujano's face hardened as he realized the true nature of his situation. The hunter had become the hunted, and the night was just beginning. "You have 1 hour," Marcus echoed the cartel's earlier ultimatum. 1 hour to leave Thunder Valley. After that, we show you why some ghosts are best left undisturbed. Thunder Valley awakened to a changed world. News helicopters circled overhead, their cameras capturing the aftermath of the night's events. FBI evidence response teams swarmed through the town, documenting the cartel's operation, while tactical units secured the remaining Desert Viper locations across 3 states. Marcus stood in Pete's Roadhouse, watching the morning unfold through rain-streaked windows. His team had maintained their positions, professional habits dying hard even after victory was secured. The damage to his triumph still lay in the motel parking lot, a reminder of how personal this fight had become. "Quite a mess you've stirred up, Ghost," a familiar voice called from the doorway. Marcus turned to find Colonel James Harper, his former commanding officer from Delta Force, surveying the scene with practiced eyes. 7 cartel operations disrupted, 3 corrupt police departments exposed, and enough evidence to keep federal prosecutors busy for years. "Sir," Marcus nodded respectfully. "Didn't expect to see you here." The colonel smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "When one of my best operators gets involved in dismantling a major cartel operation, I pay attention. But we've got a problem. The cartel's main branch isn't taking this lying down. They've already put out contracts, not just on you, but on the whole town." Sarah, who'd been organizing cleanup efforts, stopped to listen. The implications were clear. Thunder Valley's victory might have painted an even bigger target on its back. "Let them come," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the quiet confidence that had steadied his men through countless missions. "They'll find more than just one operator waiting for them this time." As if to emphasize his point, Tommy Morrison walked in, carrying tools and parts. "Found these in Dad's garage," he announced. "Figure we can start rebuilding your bike today." Half the town's offered to help. Colonel Harper watched the interaction with interest. "You're not just defending a town anymore, are you, Ghost? You're building something," Marcus nodded. The night's events had transformed Thunder Valley. Where once there was fear, now there was determination. The shared experience of standing up to the cartel had awakened something in the community, a recognition of their own strength. "Sir," Whisper's voice crackled over the radio, "we've got movement on the outskirts. Looks like some of El Cirujano's old contacts trying to salvage what they can of the operation." "Already?" Sarah asked, worry creeping back into her voice. "They're desperate," Colonel Harper explained. "Ghost didn't just hurt their operation, he exposed their vulnerability. Every criminal organization in the region is watching, wondering if their own small-town operations might be next." Marcus moved to the tactical display they'd maintained in the back office. The screens showed multiple vehicles approaching Thunder Valley from different directions. Not a coordinated assault this time, but opportunists hoping to claim abandoned territory. "They still don't understand," he said, more to himself than the others. This was never about territory. It was about people deciding they'd had enough. As if in response to his words, the radio came alive with reports from around town. Mr. Wong at the grocery store reporting suspicious vehicles. Old Joe from the garage tracking unfamiliar faces. The network of observers Marcus had helped establish was already proving its worth. "You've turned the whole town into a surveillance operation," Colonel Harper observed with approval. "Every resident a sensor, every business a checkpoint." "Not my doing," Marcus corrected him. "They organized themselves. All they needed was someone to show them it was possible to fight back." Through the window, they watched as state police intercepted one of the approaching vehicles. No shots fired, no dramatic standoff, just the quiet efficiency of a community that would no longer tolerate predators in their midst. "Ghost," Angel radioed in. "Got some interesting chatter on the encrypted channels. Cartels in 3 other states are pulling back from small-town operations. Seems nobody wants to risk becoming the next Thunder Valley." Marcus smiled. The ripple effects were already spreading. What had started as a personal vendetta over a destroyed motorcycle had evolved into something much larger, a template for how communities could reclaim their streets from those who would prey on them. "Colonel," he turned to his former commander, "I know I was supposed to retire, find a quiet place to fix motorcycles, but I think I found something more important to fix." Harper nodded understanding. "Some battles choose us, Ghost. The question is what we do once we're in them." Sarah brought over fresh coffee, her movements confident now, free from the fear that had shadowed her just days ago. "We're having a town meeting tonight," she announced. "People want to talk about making some of these security measures permanent, building something lasting. They'll need training," Marcus mused, "organization, support. They'll need leadership," Colonel Harper added meaningfully. "Someone who understands both the tactical and human elements. Someone who never forgot what it means to protect rather than just fight." Outside, the morning sun had burned away the storm clouds, revealing the stark beauty of the desert landscape. Thunder Valley was changing, evolving from a target into a fortress, not through walls or weapons, but through the strength of its people. "Well, Ghost," Harper raised an eyebrow. "Ready to trade in your retirement for something more interesting?" Marcus looked around the roadhouse, at Tommy learning to be more than a victim, at Sarah organizing community defense, at the townspeople going about their business with new purpose in their steps. His damaged triumph would be rebuilt stronger than before, just like the town it had helped save. "Sir," he replied with a slight smile, "I think retirement's going to have to wait. We've got work to do." 3 months after the fall of the desert, Vipers and El Cirujano's capture, Thunder Valley had transformed. Marcus stood in the newly renovated community center, once the cartel's headquarters, now a hub of activity and training. The walls that once housed criminal operations now displayed maps, emergency plans, and community alerts. "Another town reached out," Sarah announced, entering with a stack of reports. "Silver Creek, about 2 hours north. They're having similar problems with organized crime moving in. Asked if we could help." Marcus studied the incident reports, recognizing the pattern. The cartels might have pulled back from Thunder Valley, but they were still testing other communities, looking for soft targets. The difference now was that those communities had somewhere to turn. "What's the count up to now?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. 17, Sarah replied. 17 towns that have adopted our program. The Thunder Valley Protocol, they're calling it. The name had stuck, though Marcus found it slightly dramatic. What had started as emergency measures during the cartel confrontation had evolved into a comprehensive system for community defense. Local volunteers trained in observation and reporting, coordinated communication networks, and most importantly, the courage to stand together against intimidation. "Ghost," Whisper's voice came over the radio. You're gonna want to see this." Marcus moved to the window. A convoy of motorcycles was approaching down Main Street, not hostile this time, but familiar. The Thunder Valley Riders, a new club formed from local enthusiasts, led by Tommy Morrison. They'd become the town's unofficial patrol force, their presence a reminder that not all bikers were criminals. Tommy pulled up to the community center on his own motorcycle, a restored triumph he'd rebuilt himself with Marcus's guidance. The bike's engine purred smoothly, a testament to the young man's growing skill as a mechanic. "Perimeter check is clean," Tommy reported, removing his helmet, "but we picked up some chatter, remnants of the Desert Vipers trying to reorganize. In Phoenix, talking about revenge." Marcus nodded, unsurprised. "They can talk all they want. Thunder Valley isn't the same place they knew." As if to emphasize his point, the afternoon calm was punctuated by the sound of training at the shooting range they'd established outside town. Local law enforcement, led by Sarah's father Pete after his recovery, was conducting joint exercises with civilian volunteers. The days of the police looking the other way were over. Mr. Wong's security cameras caught something interesting, Tommy continued, pulling out his phone. 2 guys casing his store last night, not locals. The footage showed professional surveillance. Techniques, these weren't ordinary criminals. Marcus recognized the methodology from his special operations days. "They're testing our defenses," he explained, "watching how we respond to potential threats. Good. Let them watch. Let them learn." Sarah's computer chimed with an incoming message. "FBI update," she announced. "El Cirujano's trial date is set. They want you to testify." "They'll have to get in line," Marcus replied. 3 state prosecutors and 2 federal task forces all want their shot at him. The evidence we gathered didn't just break the cartel, it exposed corruption networks across the entire Southwest. The community center doors opened as more volunteers arrived for the afternoon briefing. School teachers, shop owners, retired veterans, ordinary citizens who discovered their own capacity for extraordinary courage. They took their seats as Marcus moved to the front of the room. "Latest intelligence," he began, falling into the familiar rhythm of a mission briefing. "Cartel activities are shifting away from small towns, focusing on larger urban areas where community oversight is harder to establish. But they're getting desperate, which makes them dangerous." The volunteers took notes, asked questions, demonstrated the situational awareness that had become second nature. These weren't vigilantes or wannabe soldiers. They were citizens who'd learned that safety came through preparation and unity. "Marcus," Pete called from the doorway, his limp still visible but his spirit unbroken. "Got some visitors you'll want to meet." A group of people entered, mayors and community leaders from neighboring towns, each facing their own battles against organized crime. They'd come to learn, to understand how one small town had accomplished what law enforcement alone couldn't. "The Thunder Valley Protocol isn't just about security," Marcus explained to the visitors. "It's about changing the fundamental equation. Criminals target small towns because they think we're isolated, vulnerable. They never expect us to work together." He gestured to the map covering one wall, marked with pins, showing every community that had adopted their methods. A network of resistance spreading across the Southwest, turning what the cartels saw as easy targets into hard ones. "Ghost," Whisper radioed again. "Got movement on the North Road. Looks like we've got more visitors coming in." Marcus checked. The security feeds. 3 SUVs approaching, but not with the aggressive posture of threats. These were more town representatives, more communities ready to learn how to stand up for themselves. "You know," Tommy said, watching the vehicles approach, "when they destroyed your bike that night, they thought they were just sending a message. Instead, they started a revolution." Marcus smiled, remembering the wreck that had become a symbol, of defiance. His triumph stood restored in front of the community center now, its chrome gleaming in the desert sun. But the real restoration hadn't been the motorcycle. It had been Thunder Valley itself, and through it, the hope it offered to other communities. "They never understood," he replied, watching as more people arrived, ready to learn, ready to fight back. Some things can't be broken by fear. Some things only grow stronger under pressure. Outside, the desert wind carried the sounds of a town alive with purpose. Thunder Valley had become more than just a community that had survived. It had become a beacon of resistance, a symbol of what was possible when people refused to be victims. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned, one small town at a time. The trial of Santiago El Cirujano Reyes transformed Thunder Valley into the epicenter of national attention. News vans lined Main Street, reporters prowled for interviews, and federal marshals maintained a visible presence around the courthouse. Marcus watched it all from his usual spot in Pete's Roadhouse, understanding that this moment would define not just Thunder Valley's future, but potentially the future of small towns across America. "Prosecution's ready," Sarah reported, bringing over the morning's briefings. They've got Morrison's records, the Desert Viper's financial documentation, and testimony from 32 communities about the cartel's operations. El Cirujano doesn't stand a chance, but Marcus knew better. He'd faced men like Santiago before, proud, cunning, and dangerous even in custody. The cartel enforcer hadn't survived this long by accepting defeat easily. "Ghost," Whisper's voice, crackled over the radio. "Got movement at all entry points to town, cartels making their play." Through the roadhouse windows, Marcus watched as unfamiliar vehicles began appearing. Expensive SUVs with darkened windows, motorcycles with out-of-state plates, nondescript sedans that screamed undercover cartel to his trained eye. They were trying to flood Thunder Valley with operators, hoping to overwhelm the town's defenses through sheer numbers. "They still think this is about force," Marcus commented, more to himself than to Sarah. "They never learned." Tommy burst through the door, his face flushed with excitement. "Marcus, you need to see this." Outside, the morning sun revealed an unexpected sight. Trucks and cars were rolling into Thunder Valley, but not cartel vehicles. These bore the markings of other small towns: Silver Creek, Mesa Verde, Rocky, Point, and dozens more. Communities that had adopted the Thunder Valley Protocol were sending their own people, creating a wall of solidarity against cartel intimidation. "Well, would you look at that?" Pete grinned from behind the bar. "Guess we're not so small anymore." Marcus's radio crackled with multiple reports. The cartel's operators were finding themselves shadowed at every turn, not by law enforcement, but by ordinary citizens who'd learned the art of counter-surveillance. Every attempt to establish a presence was met with quiet, organized resistance. "Sir," a young volunteer reported, "we've identified 3 cartel safe houses they tried to establish. State police are moving in now." The courthouse stood as a fortress, in the center of town, ringed by federal marshals and local law enforcement. Inside, El Cirujano waited for his trial to begin, probably believing his organization's show of force would intimidate witnesses into silence. "He's in for a surprise," Colonel Harper commented, appearing beside Marcus. The Delta Force commander had returned to observe the culmination of what his former operator had built. "Just got word. 6 more cartel lieutenants were arrested this morning. Seems some of your community observers have very good memories for faces and license plates." Marcus nodded. The cartel's attempt to pressure Thunder Valley had backfired spectacularly. Every operator they sent became another thread to pull, another connection to trace, another piece of evidence to add to the prosecution's case. "Marcus," Sarah called from the office, "you've got a call. It's El Cirujano's lawyer." The message was simple, a final offer of compromise. The cartel would leave Thunder Valley alone, permanently in exchange for certain evidence disappearing before trial. A guarantee of reduced charges for their enforcer. Marcus's response was equally simple: tell them to watch the sunrise. As dawn broke over the Superstition Mountains, hundreds of people gathered on Main Street. Shop owners opened their doors, children walked to school without fear, and visitors from other communities mingled with locals, sharing stories and strategies. This wasn't just a town preparing for a trial. It was a movement coming into its own. "Ghost," Whisper reported from his overwatch position. "Cartel vehicles are pulling out. All of them. Looks like they finally got the message." Colonel Harper raised an eyebrow. "Care to share what message that would be?" Marcus gestured to the scene before them. "Look around. Every person here represents a community that's learned to stand together. Every vehicle from out of town represents a place where the cartel's lost its grip. They're not just facing Thunder Valley anymore. They're facing an army of small towns that have learned they don't have to be victims." The courthouse doors opened as federal marshals prepared to begin the day's proceedings. El Cirujano would face not just charges from Thunder Valley, but testimony from dozens of communities that had found their voice, their courage, and their power. "You know," Tommy said, watching the crowd gather, "when they destroyed your bike that night, nobody thought it would end like this. One broken motorcycle leading to a broken cartel." Marcus smiled, remembering the wreck that had started it all. His restored triumph gleamed in the morning sun, but it wasn't just a motorcycle anymore. It was a symbol of what could be rebuilt, of how destruction could lead to something stronger. "Some things can't be broken," he replied, watching as more people arrived, ready to testify, ready to stand together. "Some things can only be transformed." The trial would begin soon, but the real victory had already been won, not in firefights or federal indictments, but in the quiet courage of ordinary people who decided that fear would no longer rule their lives. Thunder Valley had become more than just a town. It had become a testament to what was possible when people refused to be broken. The war wasn't over, but as Marcus watched his community gather strength, he knew the outcome was no longer in doubt. The cartels might rule through fear and violence, but they would never understand the power of hope, unity, and the unbreakable spirit of small towns that had learned to fight back. Thunder Valley's transformation became the stuff of legend, a story told and retold in small towns across America. A year after El Cirujano's trial and conviction, Marcus stood on the porch of Pete's Roadhouse, watching the sunrise paint the Superstition Mountains in shades of gold and purple. His restored triumph gleamed in the early light, no longer just a motorcycle, but a symbol of everything Thunder Valley had become. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Sarah said, joining him with 2 cups of coffee. The dark circles under her eyes were long gone, replaced by the confident bearing of someone who'd discovered their own strength. "Sometimes I wake up thinking it was all a dream, but it wasn't a dream. The evidence was everywhere. In the bustling streets no longer ruled by fear, in the thriving businesses once threatened by protection rackets, in the community center that had transformed from a gang headquarters into a beacon of hope. Most telling were the new faces, representatives from towns across the country, coming to learn what Thunder Valley had discovered, that unity was stronger than intimidation. "Ghost." Whisper's voice came over the radio, still maintaining his habits of vigilance. "Got visitors coming in. Looks like the Silver Creek delegation is early for the anniversary gathering." Marcus watched as a convoy of vehicles entered town, led by familiar motorcycles. The Thunder Valley Riders, now an established force for community protection, escorted the visitors under Tommy Morrison's leadership. The young man had grown into his role, turning his pain into purpose, his fear into determination. 1 year since El Cirujano's conviction, Colonel Harper commented, appearing beside Marcus with military precision. Cartel operations disrupted across 6 states, 43 communities adopting the Thunder Valley Protocol, and a new generation learning that small towns don't have to be victims. The day's gathering would bring together representatives from every community that had joined their movement. Not just law enforcement and local officials, but ordinary citizens who discovered their own capacity for extraordinary courage. They came to share stories, strategies, and the unshakable conviction that unity was their strongest defense. Latest intelligence reports, Harper continued, handing Marcus a thick folder. Cartels are abandoning small-town operations entirely. Too much risk, too little reward. They never expected their soft targets to bite back. Inside Pete's Roadhouse, now expanded to accommodate the growing crowds, photos lined the walls telling Thunder Valley's story, the destroyed triumph that had sparked a revolution. The night the Desert Vipers learned the cost of underestimating a Delta operator. El Cirujano's arrest, his face showing the dawning realization that he'd lost more than just a battle. But the most powerful images were the recent ones. Children playing freely in parks once controlled by gangs, businesses thriving without fear of extortion, communities standing together against those who would prey on them. The Thunder Valley Protocol had become more than just a security system. It had become a movement. "Marcus," Tommy called from the doorway, "they're ready for you at the community center." The former headquarters of the Desert Vipers had been transformed into a state-of-the-art training facility. Here, representatives from other towns learned the fundamentals of community defense, not through violence or vigilantism, but through organization, awareness, and the strength that comes from standing together. "Sometimes I wonder," Sarah mused as they walked, "what would have happened if they hadn't destroyed your bike that night? If they'd just left Thunder Valley alone?" Marcus thought about it. They never could have left us alone. Men like Morrison and El Cirujano don't know how to exist without crushing others. They mistake kindness for weakness, community for vulnerability, but they never understand what they're really facing until it's too late. The community center was packed with faces, both familiar and new. Pete, fully recovered, stood beside his old friend Judge Morrison. The judge's son, Tommy, now running the most successful motorcycle repair shop in 3 counties, had become a symbol of resilience for young people across the region. Even Mrs. Wong, whose convenience store had been one of the first targets of the Desert Vipers, now led workshops on community observation and reporting. "Look at this," Colonel Harper said, gesturing to the crowd. "Special Forces operators spend their careers trying to build resistance networks in hostile territory. You managed to create one in the American Southwest, using nothing but small-town values and a broken motorcycle." Marcus took the podium, facing the gathered representatives of what the media had dubbed the Thunder Valley Movement. Each face carried a story of courage found, of communities transformed, of ordinary people discovering their extraordinary potential. "A year ago," he began, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had steadied men through countless battles, "Thunder Valley was just another target, another small town marked for exploitation by those who mistake peace for weakness. They thought they could break us through fear, control us through violence, profit from our isolation." The room was silent, every person remembering their own community's struggle. But they made a crucial mistake. They assumed that small towns are soft targets because we value community over conflict, cooperation over confrontation. They never understood that these very qualities, our connections, our unity, our commitment to each other, make us stronger than any cartel, any gang, any organization that rules through fear. Through the windows, Marcus could see more vehicles arriving, police chiefs, mayors, community leaders, all drawn by the promise of what Thunder Valley represented. The movement had grown beyond anything he'd imagined that night when his triumph lay wrecked in the desert dust. The Thunder Valley Protocol isn't about turning communities into armed camps or citizens into soldiers. It's about recognizing that our greatest strength lies in standing together, in refusing to be isolated, intimidated, or divided, in understanding that real security comes not from weapons or walls, but from neighbors watching out for each other, from businesses supporting each other, from people caring enough to say, "Not in our town." Sarah, coordinating the day's events, smiled as she remembered how far they'd come. From a terrified motel manager to a leader in community defense, her journey reflected Thunder Valley's own transformation. 1 year ago, they thought destroying a motorcycle would send a message of intimidation. Instead, it became a symbol of everything they couldn't break. Thunder Valley didn't just survive. We created a template for other communities to follow. We proved that small towns don't have to be victims, that ordinary people standing together can defeat even the most powerful organizations. The applause that followed wasn't just for his words, but for what Thunder Valley represented: hope, resilience, and the power of unity against intimidation. As Marcus stepped down from the podium, Colonel Harper approached with news that proved their impact. "Just got word," the colonel said quietly. 3 more cartel lieutenants surrendered this morning. They're offering information in exchange for reduced sentences. The dominoes keep falling. Outside, the desert wind carried the sounds of a community alive with purpose. Children played in streets once ruled by fear. Businesses thrived without paying protection money, and visitors from across the country came to learn how one small town had changed everything. Marcus's restored triumph stood in front of the community center, its chrome catching the desert sun. But the real restoration hadn't been the motorcycle. It had been Thunder Valley itself, and through it, the hope it offered to communities everywhere. "You know what the hardest part of special operations training was?" Marcus asked Tommy, who'd become like a son to him over the past year. "Learning that the strongest weapon isn't your training or your equipment. It's the thing inside people that refuses to be broken, the spirit that grows stronger under pressure." As the sun climbed higher over the Superstition Mountains, Marcus watched his community welcome visitors from across the nation. Each person carried a story of resistance. Each town represented another victory against those who would rule through fear. The war wasn't over, it never really would be, but the tide had turned decisively. Thunder Valley had become more than just a town that fought back. It had become a symbol of what was possible when people refused to be victims, when communities rejected fear in favor of unity, when ordinary citizens discovered their extraordinary potential. And it all started with a broken motorcycle and the unbreakable spirit of a small town that decided to fight back. The legend of Thunder Valley would be told and retold, not just as a story of victory against overwhelming odds, but as a reminder that true strength lies not in the ability to intimidate, but in the courage to stand together. In the end, that was the most powerful message of all, that some things can't be broken by fear, some spirits only grow stronger under pressure, and some victories belong not to the mighty, but to those who refuse to be afraid. As the sun set, on another day in Thunder Valley, Marcus took one final ride through the streets he'd helped transform. His triumph's engine purred beneath him, a sound of victory rather than vengeance. The town had become more than just a community that survived. It had become a beacon of hope for others facing similar battles. Children played freely in their front yards, neighbors chatted over fence lines, and businesses stayed open late. Without fear, the Desert Vipers and El Cirujano's cartel were now just memories, their attempt to rule through fear having backfired spectacularly. Tommy Morrison waved from his motorcycle shop, where he taught young people not just about engines, but about courage and resilience. Sarah managed the community center, now a national training hub for small-town defense. Pete's Roadhouse had become a gathering place for visitors from across the country, all seeking to learn the Thunder Valley Protocol. As Marcus parked his Triumph in front of the Roadhouse, he reflected on how one act of destruction had sparked a movement that transformed communities across America. The cartel had thought they were breaking a motorcycle, but instead they'd awakened something far more powerful: the unbreakable spirit of people who refused to be victims. "Some battles choose us," Marcus had once said. "The question is what we do once we're in them." Thunder Valley had answered that question not just with resistance, but with transformation. Not just with defiance, but with hope. The war against fear and intimidation would never truly end, but now other communities had a blueprint for fighting back, a reminder that unity was stronger than any threat. As night fell over the superstition mountains, the desert wind carried the sounds of a town alive with purpose, a community that had discovered its own strength, and a legacy that would inspire others for generations to come. If you've been moved by Thunder Valley's story of courage and transformation, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We've got more incredible tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, more stories of communities standing up against impossible odds, and more reminders that the human spirit is truly unbreakable. Don't forget to leave a comment, letting us know where you're watching from, and share this video with anyone who needs to be reminded that even the smallest towns can make the biggest differences. Join us tomorrow for another amazing story of triumph against the odds. Remember, in the end, it's not about the size of the community. It's about the size of its spirit. Thunder Valley proved that when people stand together, no force can break them. Subscribe now and be part of these incredible journeys of courage, resilience, and the power of unity. This is your host, signing off from Thunder Valley, where one broken motorcycle sparked a revolution and where hope rides on two wheels toward a better tomorrow.